Hello and welcome. My name is Kyle, and this is How You Level Up, a podcast that decodes language to help you become your best self. If you've ever felt stuck between possibility and paralysis, I think you're going to like today's episode with Jillian Reilly. Jill has spent 3 decades working at the intersection of personal change and systemic transformation. She was an AIDS worker in Africa in the 90s, a program director for international projects, and a mother navigating identity shifts. Through it all, she kept running into the same pattern. People waiting for someone else to give them permission to become who they really are. Her memoir, Shame, Confessions of an AIDS Worker in Africa, and her TEDx talk in Cape Town explored these themes. But her new book, The 10 Permissions, Redefining the Rules of Adulting in the 21st Century, is where she really breaks it down. Jill has an anti-inspirational approach. She's not here to pump you up with motivational quotes. It's the raw observations of life that she acknowledges, recognizes, and then finds a way to give you permission to move forward. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure you will too. Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. I think that your journey is a really interesting one and also a very empowering story. So I would like to start perhaps somewhere near the beginning when you're 15 years old and you get your passport and you go to France. And you describe this as a geographic and internal frontier. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was the first person in my family with a passport.
Wow.
And I sort of had this interest in the world that no one else in my family did, which always made me feel a little bit weird, a little bit other. And, one of the things I talk a lot about is how some of those deepest desires often are very hard to articulate. Like you have a very hard time answering the question, why? Or even knowing where it came from. I just was always interested in the world and a sense of, a desire to explore. And honestly, nobody else in my family shares that. So I think for me to own that and articulate that and then act on that was the first boundary, the first permission giving, to use my current kind of lexicon. The first permission I gave to myself to almost like, I'll use this language, like come out to my family. It's like, okay, I'm not exactly like you. I have a set of interests that's different from you. And I'm kind of willing to, as I said, own them and act on them. And that's, that sits at the heart of, I think, so much of our own personal growth and continued evolution throughout the course of our lives, is being willing to do just that. So yeah, there were a lot of boundary crossings there.
Was there something that in your childhood had driven you to want to explore? Is there a reason why perhaps you were different from the rest of your family?
If I may say, my parents didn't have a particularly happy marriage. My home wasn't a particularly happy one. It was, on the greater spectrum of things, it was sort of middle class disgruntled, if you will. But I was super aware, particularly of my mother's, I think, sense of stuckness. Mm. So for me, as much as that middle class American dream was meant to sell progress and mobility, my own experience of it was something very different.
Right.
It was a father who went out to make money, who we didn't see very much of. It was a mother who stayed at home, growing increasingly sort of, unhappy. I was really aware of that trade-off, that we were supposed to satisfy ourselves with all the stuff that my father was buying us. And actually, there was a profound emptiness to all of it. So I wouldn't say that there was like a direct, I didn't say, okay, I'm out of here kind of thing at a conscious level. But I think certainly on a deeper level, it was like, I think there must be something better than this. And a questioning of like, is this it? Is this really what good looks like? And again, 14, 15-year-old me was not necessarily sitting down and asking myself those direct questions. I wrote a lot of poetry. So I've written my whole life in an effort to make sense of what I was experiencing or observing. And I think it came out there a lot. But yeah, it was as much a push away from the idea that this was what I was meant to aspire to, and then a pull into a broader sense of, maybe there's stuff out there that nobody around here knows about that might offer a little more than what I'm aware of.
Yes, yes. I mean, for myself too, I grew up in a very loving household, and still I saw my parents fight here and there, and that's the reason why I became so interested in communication. I didn't have any conscious awareness that I wanted to help them resolve some of their disagreements. That is, though, reflecting back, a lot of the driving force. And so we learn, of course, from our immediate school of the family, the nuclear family. And
Yeah.
yeah, I could understand that desire to want to perhaps as a young child escape a little bit this story that you're told is the way you should live life.
Yeah. And that there was no alternative offered. That was it was a very fixed world. It was, this idea that we'd sort of made it. That was that boomer generation. My parents neither one of them came from all that much. So they were the first generation to do a lot of things, to do so well, if you will. And yeah, I kind of was like, wow, if this is what I'm being sold or told is what I should be aspiring to. And I think an interesting thing too for my generation of women was that a lot of us had moms who didn't have a lot of options. And so we were among the first, this Gen X generation of women who went to university, who, entered into the workplace en masse. And so there was that too. It was like, no, I'm getting out so that I've got options that she didn't have. Of course, I then made very different choices. But I think, for women of my age, I don't think I'm the only one who found myself observing a mother who did not have a lot of options.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that's been a cornerstone of my life. Like, I want to keep options open. I want to make sure that I'm continually sort of having room to move and grow.
Let's jump forward a couple of years. And you talk about how there's this moment where Tom, who is your government minder, I'm not quite sure, would love you to explain what a government minder is. And when you realize that you cannot give people power, you cannot give them permission. Can you take us back to that moment?
Yeah. So at a fairly young age, I decided to leave Midwestern life and go to South Africa in the midst of its transition to democracy, thinking it was a brief sort of detour from a path that I would get back onto. And eventually it turned into its own trajectory into the world of international aid and international development. And I landed in Zimbabwe in the middle of its biggest AIDS crisis, and the world's biggest AIDS crisis, I should say. And I was, 27 years old and thought I could do anything, and had a big budget and had all the mandate in the world to go out and kind of get on top of this thing. And let's say that it was one of the biggest humblings of my adult life in terms of becoming deeply aware of my limitations to sort of catalyze change on behalf of others. Because, we were throwing everything at this, and we were telling people what they should do, telling them to basically break with longstanding tradition in order to adopt behaviors that were going to be, better for them in terms of, not spreading the AIDS virus, and coming up against a huge amount of resistance. And, but the mandate for me was like, it's okay, fine. Just keep pushing, just keep getting money their way, keep trying. And I was sort of like, I've realized that no matter what I give people, I personally cannot give them permission to make new choices. I can't give them permission to break with centuries old tradition. And to be the first one in their family to do something, or to be the last. That's a very individual decision. And that was when it really kind of struck me that so much of growth and change it's hugely personal. It's you and you deciding like, okay, I'm going to go home and have a different kind of conversation with my husband, or, I'm going to go to that meeting tomorrow and present my very best idea. Nobody can make you do that. So yeah, it was in the midst of that sort of super profound change in Zimbabwe that I realized that, you could do all the biggest things in the world, but these are very personal and intimate decisions that people take to take their lives in new directions. And it's kind of where that theme of permission first started to kind of come out for me, was just authorizing yourself to do something different, to do something you want. And that, was not within my budget to give people. So yeah, it was a tremendous education for me as a still relatively young woman.
Yeah, I mean, you're battling up against all of the cultural norms when you throw money or you throw education at a problem. And so what you're talking about here is allowing an individual to decide for themselves, no, I do have permission to do this thing, whatever this thing is, even if it goes against the grain of my culture or my family.
Right. And I think, the reality was what we were asking people to do there was in many cases very dangerous for them. Mm-hmm. And I tell a story about that in my book of women who did take our advice, if you will. I mean, we were doing condom demonstrations with women so that they could go home and try and get their husbands to use them, which was ridiculous because they did not have that authority within their culture, within their marriage to initiate those conversations. So in asking people to do that, we were setting them up to fail and worse, setting them up to potentially be victims of violence, which they were. So, that was also one of the things I talk about in my book is distinguishing danger from discomfort. Mm-hmm. So there are certain situations where, yeah, it is dangerous to follow your desire, to back yourself, to be the first or the last, as I said. For most of us, it's more uncomfortable than anything. We're not facing any true danger. We're facing a loss of approval, a sense of rejection, a fear of the unknown. And once you start, I will say, having been present with people who were in actual danger, it's very clarifying. Those women are still with me today. And whenever I find myself, feeling scared of something, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, you're going to be okay.
Right. Compared to the alternative, it could be much worse.
It could be much worse. And I think it's really important for those of us who have that, dare I use the now overused words of privilege, right, to recognize that, we've got to sort of explore the limits of our discomfort tolerance, perhaps a little bit more than we allow ourselves to do, in order to make some of the choices that we want to make most deeply.
Right. There must have been success stories. You have a lot of situations where, a woman goes home, her husband is not receptive to the education or information that she's sharing. What was unique about some success stories that you saw? And then how, if you could, were those replicated?
I have to think for a moment about those.
Okay.
I think this is actually quite relevant. So where my mind first went to was a lot of the work that we did with leaders. So people who already had authority, right? Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't as dangerous for them. We did a lot of work with traditional leaders. I personally did a lot of work with religious leaders who found themselves in positions where they could take on these conversations. And not surprisingly, they could give themselves permission to have a tough conversation, to raise an issue that other people felt was very stigmatized. It wasn't completely without consequence, but the nature of their position meant that they were probably a little bit more protected from backlash than an average woman was. So, I think as I look back and reflect back, there were instances where our attempts to engage people in positions of formal power and formal authority to get them to use that more effectively, those things, quote unquote, worked. We got a little more traction. There was a little more sort of space then for them to do things that felt very uncomfortable, because it does, and there are, although that for many of your listeners will probably feel very foreign and we just went through an epidemic. We are going through profound change in a number of different ways. So, we all experience these similar things. It's just, different context, but, having the discussions nobody wants to have, raising the taboo issue, taking the conversation to the place everybody knows it needs to go, but nobody wants to be the one to raise it.
Right.
Those things are real for all of us. And it does take tremendous amounts of self-permission to be the one to decide to do that.
Yes. We're talking around a little bit, and we haven't explicitly stated it, of, between permissions and empowerment, that empowerment can be an external and permissions are this internal thing. It originates within you. And I'd like for you to break that down for us just a tad bit more, maybe around the ideas of being conditioned for external permission rather than for internal permission.
Yeah. And by the way, by the time I left my career in the aid industry or left Zimbabwe, actually, I refuse to use the word empowerment anymore. Oh. I've only recently started to figure out how I could possibly use it and have it not feel really false. Because again, this idea that I could give somebody power, it was like, no, I can't. I can create conditions for people to decide for themselves that they are going to, step into a different kind of relationship to the people around them or to themselves. But that is not something for me to hand to somebody. So, for me, that's such an interesting word for us to explore. And yet it does sit at the heart of this, which is claiming your power, right? Claiming your ability to make choice. And I think, in the book, I talk about the permissions, what I describe as this permissions paradigm of raising kids to ask for permission necessarily, in many cases, in order for them to understand, right from wrong, what the rules are, where they fit within bigger structures and systems, but not intentionally supporting young adults to learn to give themselves permission, to back themselves, to authorize themselves to make choices that they believe are right for them. And I think in this world that we're living in right now, that's more important than ever. I think, in the 20th century world, in even my world that I was growing up in, there were fewer choices. There was more of a consensus around right and wrong. Nobody had to tell me to go to college, and there was an absolute consensus that was the right thing to do. That if I did that, I then unlocked opportunities on the other side that would leave me feeling safe and secure. I think in this world, where everything's up for grabs, where a lot of the things that we once considered no-brainers are now in question. Mm-hmm. That being a good example. Should I go to college? Is it worth it? Does it make sense? There's far more pressure on the individual to make those choices, to decide for themselves what's right for them, because there's no consensus anymore on, capital R right. Mm-hmm. It's like, you've got to decide more and more, is this right for me? And if you're constantly looking around and expecting somebody else to tell you that, somebody else to green light your decision, you'll find 1,000 different people who'll give you 1,000 different answers. So at the end of the day, you've got to come back to yourself and say, what do I believe is right for me? And young people need to be equipped, in my opinion, to do that more than ever.
There's a couple of different directions we could go from here. I can't help but be curious. Before you got your passport at 15, was there somebody that modeled making these decisions for themselves that you were observing? Was there someone perhaps in your childhood that you saw, hey, they're going a little bit against the grain and they look like they're having a good time, or whatever the situation may have been?
That is such a good question. And I'm trying to remember if I included this in my first book. I must have. But I grew up watching Julia Child. So I would wake up on a Saturday morning, I guess it wasn't Sunday morning, but I would wake up and I had my little black and white TV and I turn it on and there was this woman who was this American woman who was actually seemed like so exotic to me and so worldly and so knowledgeable and in control, and in a man's world, the world of French cooking, the world of being a chef, there she was, owning that space. And again, I didn't think any of that consciously, but I was absolutely fascinated by this woman. And I remember kind of my mother walking in one morning and being like, what are you doing?
Oh my.
What are you watching? And I was like, I was supposed to be watching cartoons and I was watching Julia Child. That was the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question, because I don't think there was anybody in my immediate circle who was modeling that. It was more this idea of these people far away who were living lives that looked a little bit more like the one that I aspired to create for myself.
If I would share this short story that you just shared with my mom, she would look at me and go, but you didn't learn anything from TV, right? You learned things from me. And of course. And I do have this fun back and forth with my mother, which is that I did learn a lot from anime and cartoons growing up. And I think she sometimes feels as though perhaps it's her fault, right? Parents want to own the responsibility of rearing a child and bringing them the right values and ethics and allowing them to then watch their child bloom into this wonderful person. And so perhaps I wonder, how do you balance that in your own life of rearing children, and how is it that you give them permission, recognizing that they're going to learn not just from you, but from other people around them, whether it be TV or celebrities on the internet?
Oh, yeah. Gosh, that again is such a good question. And I feel that now as a mom of teenagers.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, when your kids are little, you think you're going to be this shining star source of all, wisdom and knowledge and input. And you kind of hope that on some level you are. And then that gradual, distancing that comes naturally and necessarily and appropriately means that you recognize that they are out there absorbing things, and more than ever. I mean, my goodness, now it's like you just throw your hands up in the air and say, when they come to you with something that is completely outside of your purview, how do you even know that? Then there's this oh, amazing. Wow, you're out there sort of absorbing things that I don't even have access to. I think I've sort of made peace with the fact that I'm primarily, if I live my life in the truest way that I can, if I make my best choices that feel right for me, that are, a reflection of the kind of path that I would hope that they would feel permitted to create for themselves, that's probably the best that I can do. That modeling that, giving them an everyday example of what that looks and feels like, and by default, showing them that it is permitted, that it is allowed. And if I may say, I think particularly as a mom and particularly as a woman, because no matter how far we've traveled on these issues, there's still, and as a mother of boys, I think it's particularly important for me not to attempt to inculcate them, especially a 17-year-old is so not interested in that. But if I can at least give him and them a model of somebody who's putting her best contribution out there in the most authentic way she can, then that's probably the best I can do. And then whenever I have the opportunity, attempt to have the best conversations I can have with them, which sometimes is just 2 sentences. But, yeah, it's an interesting process of accepting the fact that you were once this, you once pulled so many strings in their lives, and now you are one of many, many resources and sources of information and influence for them. And so you have to, as I say, sort of kind of take up whatever space you do have, I think, with the most integrity that you can.
Right, right. It's good information for me to absorb here as we're expecting later this year. So
Okay.
I'll take that to heart.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I will say that I'm finding this phase truly fascinating. And I was just chatting to somebody earlier who said, this is when there are moments in this journey when I think you're more acutely aware that you are being raised alongside them. And I will say birth is one of those kind of, key moments of like, okay, I'm entering into new territory in my life. And I feel like these teenage years are quite similar. It's a very different sort of relationship that you're creating. And so there's a lot of learning and a lot of falling down on your face and getting back up again and just carrying on and doing your best.
Yeah. Teenagers are great. I can't imagine. Well, I'll get there one day.
Yes, you will. You will.
So there is something that I want to touch on, changing topics just a little bit. You say that want is the only antidote to should. And so that's a powerful statement. It's a very short, pithy statement. And how do people connect with that? And, how do you think they should want or think they should want?
Yeah. I mean, my first permission is be willful. And so that is all about connecting with, and kind of the way I describe my trip to France, recognizing it, articulating it, acting on it, starting small. I think there are a lot of people for whom want feels totally inaccessible from a very early age. I think if we go back to that permissions paradigm and the sort of rearing of children to be good boys and girls, smothering your want, denying it, outsourcing it to everybody around you is regarded as a positive quality. You are amenable, you are easy, you kind of go with the flow. And, there are people that we all know who we can ask them what they want for lunch and they have a very difficult time answering the question. Or else they immediately say, I don't know, what do you want? There's something transgressive about it, right? To say I want feels demanding and greedy and, asserting your desire over others. And part of what I'm trying to do with this is say, not only is it okay, because it's a core driver of the human experience. And by the way, it's the key driver of some of the best experiences you're ever going to have. In a disruptive world, if you're not connected to that, you're going to find yourself getting sort of, flung around, tossed around, or else being just stuck in place and not knowing where to go, because the world is changing so quickly. You're so overwhelmed by people telling you what you should want. You've got so many choices to make. As I said a little while ago, the kind of unraveling of the few right paths means that you have to know what you want. And if that feels transgressive, if you spend so much time saying, I don't know, or tell me what I should want, I think it's the root cause of so much overwhelm, anxiety, fundamental kind of sense of kind of precariousness that so many of us feel right now, because historically we outsourced it. We said, tell me what I should want. I guess I should want to be a teacher, or I should want to be a doctor. And so, this is a much more fluid and flexible world that not only requires you on many levels to know what you want, and that's down from what do you want in your coffee to, what do you want to create? What do you want to learn? To, it rewards people who say, I want to make a podcast. I want to, go and learn AI online. So, I talk a lot about agency, and a lot of people are talking about agency right now. Is that sort of connection to your own desire and your willingness to act on it? And in my mind, this world, and it's only accelerating, is a world that really requires us to kind of lock into that in a way that wasn't necessary 20, 30 years ago. But right now it is. And I see it as like a muscle that you exercise. And the more you exercise it, the more stronger it gets, the more comfortable you get with it. And you start small like you would with anything else. You start to get used to feeling it, listening to it, saying it, acting on it, and then it doesn't feel so weird anymore. Or even if it does feel weird, you're okay. And should is just outsourcing it. It's other people telling you what you must want, and acquiescing with that. And to me, that's the root cause of a lot of people's misery, because they've never ever kind of locked into their own desires, and they've spent a lot of time trying to please other people's sense of who they should be, and until it reaches crisis point and they have no lived experience of acting on their own desire. So I think desire is a super important driver in this very fluid world.
And I'm so glad you brought it up, how do you think that AI begins to impact our wants or our expressions of desires rather than falling upon those shoulds that are implemented within the society, and give us sort of like paved roads to travel down?
Yeah, I mean, they're simply put, a lot of the historic shoulds that rewarded us, that were safe bets, are disappearing in front of our eyes, leaving us kind of going, okay, so if I'm, and I think specifically with young people right now, and as a parent, so if I want to tell my son Luke what I think he should do, you think I would know? I can't look out there and go, even if I told him one of the classic sort of shoulds, or, something that we all agreed was a good thing, go and be a doctor or something like that, that was, kind of right up there. Even that's question mark in terms of what is that going to look like? So within all of this unraveling of all of the old shoulds that we felt we could sort of hang on to make our choices, is all this space. And we've got to fill it with something. Because if we're not going to fill it with something, we're going to be left standing stock still, staring at it going, I don't know what to do. Do you know what to do? And the only thing to do is to step into it with a sense of, okay, I want to go and explore some things and learn some things that I think might be useful for me. So I think AI is making human desire ever more important. And I think it is going to be one of the things that has the potential to not only help us thrive in this world, but, continue to claim our relevance and make our best contributions.
Sometimes I find that when I read classic works, or I read some, what I consider to be a great philosophical work, there are contradictions in it. And I hope you like this priming too. So you share that permission 6 is forget about the future. And that seems a little bit counterintuitive, especially with us talking about how does someone build up that want or desire for their own future. Can you talk a little bit more about permission 6?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the classic mindset framing for how you carved your path forward was decide where you want to go and then sort of work deductively to get there. And for those of us who worked in the business of change or the business of growth, it was always you decided what your desired future was, and then you worked backwards, which I think worked quite well in a relatively stable and predictable world where we had a fairly long line of sight. And we could say, the 5-year plan was a hallmark of the late 90s, where it was like, if you didn't have that, it was a failing. Now, it literally makes me laugh to think that anybody could sit here right now and say with great certainty that they know what 5 years from now is going to look like, not only because, the world is so fluid, it makes that hard, but the other piece that I'm adding in there is maybe it's not desirable to pretend that you can know what lies ahead, because we never could. It was always our best guess, and that was based on what had always been. Right now, we don't know. And so it's kind of an invitation to lean into not knowing, to lean into a more inductive way of finding your way forward, to work in shorter time frames. So, again, I have a lot of people that I work with, and particularly younger people, who are like, I don't have a plan. And I'm like, it's okay. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're destined for, some sort of life on the fringes of society. It means that you are discovering your way forward at a time when it is really hard to know. And I think we need to let ourselves off the hook for acting like we know exactly where we're going. So my advice in the book is to have, a sense of direction, but not necessarily claim that you have a clear destination. So I'd love to get into, the food industry, or I think I'd like to open a restaurant. Cool. It's a general area that you want to go. So set out in that direction. Be super, super tuned in to what you're learning as you go, to what's evolving along the way, and allow that vision to adapt as the world adapts. Don't lock yourself into something that you think looks good from here, because it might change. So for me, it's just sort of flipping. It's like we always had the future in front, and then we just kind of raced to get there. Now I'm like, have that in the back of your mind. Allow it to be kind of loose. Allow yourself to, pivot and shift as you go, but be super present. Be super duper, attuned to now and everything you can learn from now, so that you are navigating. And for me, it really is like that. It's like if you were trying to find your way through a thick forest, you'd have a general sense of where you could go, but you wouldn't know, I'm going to go like that. So you're really, really slowly moving your way through things. And you know that it's okay, that it's not all going to be seamless and straight, that it will involve some shifts and some changes. And that's okay. More than that, it's a good thing, because it means that you're learning and adapting alongside a world that's evolving quicker than most of us can keep up with it.
Yeah. The book comes out, 10 Permissions, comes out in September. And I don't want us to go too much into the book. I want to leave some mystery to it. The 10 Permissions themselves, though, how do they work together? Do you have to apply all 10? Is there an order to them? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I would say that they're not, linear. I really wanted it to be the case that somebody could pick one of them up and read it, and that as a standalone might be of value to them, might spark some fresh thinking in their minds. And I would still say that, and I would guess, although I'm learning how people are going to make use and make sense of these, that some will resonate more than others, depending upon who you are, where you are, what's happening in your life. I will say that the way I see them, it's almost like the first two are really foundational in terms of your understanding of what's allowed. Be willful and go astray are like, those are the big things. I get to decide what I want, and it's not all going to be straight and linear and fixed for the rest of my life. That's sort of getting at two of the real cornerstones of our default programming about what our lives are going to look like. Like, those are pretty foundational. And then take it outside and feel your way, or sort of how you start to set out into the world to discover and create. That, your lived experience of your life might look and feel different than you expect. And that goes along again with think small, forget about the future. It's like, it's not going to be this, you are navigating, you are finding your way. It might look very different than what you expected, might feel different than what you imagine your parents' life looked like. These things are okay. The last three are where I kind of encourage people to sort of make their best contributions. Like, this isn't just about how I advance myself in a fluid world. Look for trouble, travel light, make believe. That's about, how am I showing up then in this world? In a world that is begging for our best contributions, that really wants us to be out there, not just, accumulating more, but actually contributing more. And so those three sort of, for me, fit into that. Having said that, I honestly think you could read them back to front and they would still potentially make sense to you. So they're a nice set, but I think they each also stand on their own in their own way.
And you didn't happen to write this book where the left page is moving forward and the right page is moving backwards, right? It is a linear book, right? We're not jumping around.
It is. No, I had that idea. I did.
Really?
There was a point in this, ish. There was a point in this very long journey, because I started this in 2020 during COVID.
Right.
I had all sorts of different ideas. Like, what I really didn't want. So it's a very readable book. It's, nobody's reading anymore. So I was like, if I am going to write something, it better be something that you can move through with some sense of ease, that, again, you can pick up and put down. Like, I didn't want another 300-page tome where the same point is illustrated in 7 different academic case studies or something like that. I wanted, when I call it a playbook, like, I wanted it to be light and tight and usable. And so, I thought of it being experiential. I thought of it, maybe having some sort of elements to it that forced you to not just sit and read. But, at the end of the day, I then thought, actually, let me just make it simple. And then I can create other things around it if I want to enhance people's understanding of these things in a different way. But yeah, no, it's left to right, cover to cover, but it's also something that I hope people will find fairly easy to navigate.
In helping them navigate it, what are the common misconceptions with the 10 permissions? What are the common themes you see that are misunderstandings?
I would say less misunderstanding and more of sort of how I'd really like to nudge people. I think the personal development space, the personal growth space, however you want to label this. For me, I am definitely wanting to play a little bit and nudge a little bit and push a little bit around what I see as some of the common understandings of how we grow. And one is that we do it on our own and mostly in our heads. We read books full of good ideas, and then we sit down and we sort of assimilate them and, then go out and apply them in some grand way. And I just don't think that's feasible. And I think particularly now it really isn't feasible, that we know we're in a period of deep isolation, of people feeling kind of alienated and alone. And part of what I'm trying to encourage, not just in the book, but in the stuff that comes with it. So you can download a workbook, a getting started workbook with the book. And that points you to, basic things you can do every day. So super simple. Don't blow up your life. Don't start dreaming of some grand life. Start with your life exactly as it is and start stretching out into it and showing up to it in all sorts of small ways. So small, everyday things, and many of which that might actually feel good. So again, I think we've got a big obsession with sort of pain and struggle. And I'm encouraging people to start to kind of practice and play around with these permissions in what I describe as low consequence, high pleasure ways. Because we immediately start talking about work and relationships and family and where we live. And it's like, these are the big kind of deals in our life. And guess what? We're very reluctant to make choices and changes in those areas that feel threatening to us. So don't start there unless you are super ready to do that. For most of us, it's like, let's start with stuff that, nobody needs to even know about, except you and maybe the people closest to you. Let's just start building a capability for choice. which sounds silly, but to me, that is the essence of an intentional life. Um, let's see this as a practice and not as a problem solving exercise. And, I take a lot of inspiration from like the fitness industry, if you will. So see this as you're building up like a change fitness. You're building up an adaptive fitness to help you find your way through a really crazy world. I don't want you to come into this with, I hate my job and now I have to decide what to do about it. So, that it will be small, that it might feel good, that it will involve others. We don't mostly sit by ourselves and think our way into a new life. We've got to go out and show up and be with others and live slightly broader, richer lives to start feeling more capable, more inspired, more stimulated. So yeah, it's more that, what I really don't want is people to just think, oh, well, these are good ideas that I need to now ruminate on for the next 6 months before I take some massive action in my life. It's like, no. Let's start playing around with this. Yeah. And as I said, to kind of see it as building a capability rather than, fixing something that feels broken in your life.
There's a couple of sayings that are coming up for me, and they're related to your failure-informed wisdom of, right, you take these permissions and apply them to the small things in life, and then learn from that failure. And the sayings that are coming up for me is, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And I really enjoy saying that, and my partner Will should be like, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And I'm like, no, learn. It's all about learning.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. So failure-informed wisdom, please. How did you come to this? Because it's, again, a very compact 3 words, but it carries so much.
Yeah. I mean, if there's anything that I think most of us, as from the minute that we sit down at a desk, don't feel allowed to do, and that is fail. I mean, that is the big taboo. That is our value in this world up for question. So once we get into that space, which is literally, once we start being tested, once we start, once all of our learning and so much of our sense of identity and our sense of lived experience comes up here to what do you know, how well can you articulate it, et cetera, there's this fear of failing. And for as long as that's a hallmark of your sense of rules, like, how do you ever go out and do anything new? How do you ever embrace a way of being and doing that allows you to try things?
Right.
So, there's so much out there right now about how so much of succeeding, if you will, right now is going back to being a kid. And a lot of this is unlearning. And I absolutely agree that there are big elements of that, we have to a great extent been conditioned to be workers, to be laborers, to sit at desks, to produce. And what's truly revolutionary in my mind about AI is the way it's blowing that up. So, we were supposed to be machines, and that was how we garnered value. And now that the machines are actually doing this stuff better than we are, we're being now invited, I think, to step into potentially a more robust human space, a juicier space that will have to involve us trying things and failing, learning. And once you start to reframe it as learning, it seems so obvious. It's like, well, of course. Of course, that's what it is. It can't be anything other than that. So, I think that's a kind of core permission that cuts through so much of this, basic framing of becoming more adaptive, is that you've got to try things. You've got to run small experiments. You've got to place small bets on yourself. And in that space, that's where you actually start to develop the capability to evolve at a greater pace that you might need right now.
Yeah. If someone is feeling stuck in should thinking, how would you approach them? How would you support them?
I think in some ways just beginning to have a conversation with yourself. I think so often we externalize a lot of these things. Again, I'm reflecting back on my own experience of coming in as an outsider to engage with people where, uh, especially as adults, so much of that, again, is my own self-limiting behavior. There are very few cases where there are external rules that are written down or people enforcing those rules. Now, you could maybe point to a boss or something, but as adults, we actually have so much more space than we often take up to begin to write our rules and kind of look with curiosity and care at the should story that has shaped who we want to become. So for me, it's about developing a really acute sort of self-awareness and doing that, as I try and say in the book, like with great curiosity and care. This is not analyzing yourself, but it's becoming aware of what that story is. And again, I think that that comes to life in very small ways. So I try and get people to tune in to some of the smaller permissions that they need to give to themselves. I'll give an example. I run a small group of people, and one of the big things that comes up all the time is like rest, permission to rest, permission to stop, permission to not be productive. And that is probably the should story of our time. And once you become like, if you say, I'm going to give myself permission to rest, you then start to become, and I encourage people to write it down, because it's a very different experience when you write something down and say, okay, I'm giving myself permission to rest. And just that is a really weird thing of kind of going, why do I have to give myself permission to do that? Like, that's weird. Of course I can rest. Can I?
Right.
So you have this heightened sense of what these kind of default patterns are in your life and what that should story is. So then you start, and it takes time. It's not oh, cool. Now observing, becoming aware, creating, and I encourage a lot of journaling, call it whatever you want to call it. I actually tell people to maybe like buy a sketchbook, because journaling puts us in the space of words and often stories where we have to have beginning, middles, and ends. So, sketch things down, write them out, allow yourself to document some of this through other things, doodles and pictures and scraps of information, little bits of ideas that come to your mind about what is at stake for you in this should story. Why is my identity so wound up in the idea, the concept that I need to be constantly productive? What is that about? I mean, most of us could spend the rest of our days observing that. But once you become aware of that, you then can start in super small ways to start allowing yourself to nudge it and shift it and stretch it out. So, to me, it's, you are normally your biggest barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And you are your only enabler, as I said at the start of this. You are your green light and you are your red light. And so I can only try and create a heightened awareness in you of what is it. The last thing I'm going to say about that is that I also encourage people to start to much more deliberately expose themselves to new things and to new people, because I think new reference points and new experiences are really important parts of this process that take you out of your head and put you into situations where you start to look at yourself afresh, you start to look at other people, you get kind of fresh input. For me, the biggest thing to avoid is this kind of constant rumination about why am I like this or what's going on. In addition to the heightened self-awareness, I think there needs to be an active choice to kind of begin to put yourself in places that messes a little bit with some of these default patterns.
Yeah.
And allows you to see possibility where maybe it didn't exist before.
Yeah. Looking back from Zimbabwe in 1999 to now, what would be one thing you could tell yourself, your younger version, who was sitting in the Land Cruiser driving around? It could be a permission. It could be just a general encouragement, whatever maybe you think that you needed most looking back.
Oh, I definitely think I needed permission. I didn't have it. I didn't feel it. I didn't have it. I didn't give it to myself. I was dying inside, kind of. I mean, that's why the title of my first book was Shame. I mean, I felt genuinely ashamed that I had this power in my hands, and I didn't figure out how to use it in a way that felt as beneficial as it could have been. And that was because I was afraid. My own sense of self at that point was really wrapped up in this idea that I was this very young director. I really liked that. I liked the idea of that. I didn't feel that I had enough backing to start to challenge in the way that I think I really wanted to. So I would say two things. One, you probably can piss people off more than you think you can and still be safe. And I think we probably all can. I think my handler, I could have probably had more challenging conversations with him than I did, but I was afraid of taking up that space, that somehow it might threaten me. And I'm thinking that maybe I had more room there than I actually allowed myself to believe. Secondly, I would say, don't worry that you feel like none of this matters, because it will matter. You're busy gathering lessons. One of the things I say to young people is, imagine that you're taking this big toolbox with you as you head out. You're constantly filling it with capabilities and experiences. And you don't know when you're going to reach into that and pull something out and go, hey, I know how to do that. Or, hey, I've been there before. I was gathering tools and experiences that would inform so much of my life later on. And I couldn't see that at the time. But, if I had allowed myself to say, okay, this is what it is, and you're not going to change it in your current where you are in life, but just know that this experience will live with you forever, and you will take it in the future and figure out how to make it valuable for other people.
One last question before we part ways today. If there was a question that you could ask the audience or the world to have them ponder how they can level up in their life, what would that question be?
In what ways do you think the current culture of fear is limiting you from exploring some of the possibilities that are available to us today?
Beautiful. Thank you. Jill, this has been wonderful chatting. And I'm going to put a bunch of links in the show notes. What would be the best ways for people to reach out and find your book?
It is currently available on Amazon for pre-order. So I really want to tell everybody to go over there and get a copy of it. It will also be in bookstores, but that link will be in the show notes. They can also get it on my website, 10permissions.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. Really encourage people to reach out to, let me know how this theme of permissions and how these 10 permissions are playing out for them, where they're making meaning with them, how they're making sense of them.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Kyle. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to How You Level Up. If you're enjoying the show, subscribe and give a 5-star rating. There are new episodes each month asking questions about timeless communication lessons. Language is a medium for sharing, and the knowledge unpacked here can be applied to anyone, anywhere, facing any challenge. If there's a question or topic you'd like me to dive into next, send a note to any of my connected social media accounts. This is all about how you level up.